The council declared humans weak. Seconds later, stars burned. The vote was already happening when I walked in. I could see it on the display panels lining the walls of the Grand Conclave, a slow cascade of colored lights, each one representing a civilization casting its decision. Green for approval, green for the sanction, green for the quiet end of everything humanity had worked for across 400 years of reaching into the stars. And they were all green, every single one, before I had even reached my seat. My name is Yara Solis. I am the senior human delegate to the Interstellar Accord Council, and on that morning, I was also the only human being within 6 light-years of that chamber. I walked the length of the hall alone. That was the part that seemed to confuse them the most. Every other delegation that morning had arrived with ceremony, honor guards in formation, advisors in layered robes, creatures that served as living symbols of power just by standing still. The Volkai High Arbiter had entered in a procession of 40. The Drevani bloc had sent 3 warships to orbit the station as a visual statement. Even the Sulhari, who were technically a pacifist culture, had arrived with armed escorts and a broadcast drone to record every moment. I had arrived on a transport the size of a city bus, carrying 1 bag and 1 aide named Colin Marsh, who was 26 years old and currently standing at the back of the chamber looking like he very much wanted to be somewhere else. I did not blame him. The Grand Conclave was enormous, a spherical chamber carved into the heart of the Accord's orbital station, with seating arranged in concentric rings that descended toward a central floor. The ceiling was open to space through a transparent dome, and above us, the stars were very bright and very still. 4,000 species were watching this session through the QuantumCast network. Estimates said the real-time audience was somewhere in the range of 900 billion individuals. I took my seat at the human observer position, a single chair at the far edge of the floor-level ring, positioned, I had always noticed, slightly lower than every other delegation's seat. Not by much, just enough that you had to look up at everyone else. Someone had designed that on purpose, a long time ago, and no one had ever corrected it. The High Arbiter, Vethan of the Volkai, was already speaking. Vethan was ancient by any standard, a crystalline entity whose body had been growing and refracting light for over 6,000 years. When Volkai spoke, they did not use sound in the traditional sense. Their communication was a combination of structured light pulses and low-frequency vibration that the chamber's translation matrix converted into something resembling a voice. It came out as calm, precise, and entirely without warmth. "The assessment has been completed," Vethan said. "The Council's evaluation of the species designated as Homo sapiens human has reached its formal conclusion. The findings will now be entered into the record." A display panel near the ceiling activated, projecting the summary document that I had already read 3 times on the transport. I had read it enough times that I could have recited it from memory. It did not make it easier to hear spoken aloud. Biological profile, significantly suboptimal, average lifespan of less than 100 standard cycles, immune to fewer than 40% of cataloged environmental hazards without artificial intervention. No natural armor, no natural weaponry, limited sensory range. Rated as one of the most physically vulnerable sapient species in current Accord records. Someone in the upper rings made a sound. The translation matrix rendered it as noted agreement. I kept my face still. Technological profile, developing. Human civilization has achieved faster-than-light travel and energy projection capabilities within the last 200 cycles. However, total fleet capacity remains below Tier 3 classification. Weapons systems are unsophisticated by current standards. Infrastructure is fragile and heavily dependent on centralized nodes, rated as a low strategic concern. Psychological and behavioral profile. Vethan paused here, which was unusual. When a Volkai paused, it meant they were constructing a careful sentence. Human decision-making is heavily influenced by emotional states, Behavioral modeling indicates high variance and low predictability. Internal conflict between human political entities remains frequent. The species has demonstrated an historical pattern of significant self-destructive activity. The Council's behavioral analysts have concluded that this instability, while notable, does not elevate the species' threat potential. Unpredictability in a weak entity remains weakness. The chamber was not silent. It was filled with the specific kind of sound that happens when thousands of beings decide not to suppress their reaction. Clicks, harmonics, pressure waves, color shifts. The translation matrix, working hard, rendered the general tone as amusement. I sat with my hands folded on the table in front of me. Vethan continued. Based on these findings, the Council has determined that the species Homo sapiens does not meet the requirements for full Accord membership. Furthermore, the Council has determined that human expansion into unratified star systems represents a violation of Accord territorial protocols. The proposed sanction decree will revoke humanity's observer status and authorize any Accord member civilization to administer the affected systems directly. The vote display on the wall was already showing the result. It had been showing it since before I sat down. 312 civilizations, 312 green lights. Vethan looked at me. The human delegate may offer final remarks. The Council will allow 90 seconds. 90 seconds, not the standard 15 minutes granted to any full member in dispute. 90 seconds, which was roughly the time it took to read a formal objection and sit down. I had been given the kind of time you give someone when you have already decided the answer, and you are offering the gesture of listening as a courtesy. I looked around the chamber. I looked at the dome above and the stars beyond it. I looked at Colin at the back of the room, who gave me a very small, very human nod. I stood up. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. "I want to be honest with you. I came here hoping you were smarter than this." The chamber went very quiet. I read the assessment. Your analysts are thorough. They measured everything they knew to measure, and they measured it well. Our lifespan, our biology, our declared fleet capacity, our political instability. All of it accurate. All of it in isolation, exactly as weak as you have concluded. I let that sit for a moment. You measured the outside of us and you called it the whole of us. And that is the only mistake you have made, but it is a significant one. Vethan's light patterns shifted in a way the matrix translated, as the time limit will be enforced. "I am not asking you to change your vote," I said. "I am asking you to remember this moment, because in a very short time you are going to want to understand how you arrived here." I sat down. I folded my hands again, the vote finalized. The green lights did not change. 90 seconds. I had used 64 of them. As the chamber filled with the procedural sounds of a session concluding, I reached under the table and pressed my thumb to the small communication device I had carried from Earth. One signal, prearranged. 3 words in response that appeared on the tiny screen where only I could read them. "Standing by, Commander." I looked up at the stars through the dome. They looked back, indifferent and enormous and very, very old. I thought about all the things those stars had watched humanity survive. Then I thought about what humanity had been quietly building in the dark places between them. I closed my eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then I opened them and stood up and walked back out of the chamber alone, the way I had come in. Colin fell into step beside me in the corridor. He said nothing for almost a full minute. That was one of the things I had always liked about him. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "Now," I said, "we find out if we were right to be patient." He glanced at me. "Were we?" I did not answer him immediately. I thought about the 200 years of silence, the programs that had no official names, the scientists and engineers who had chosen to disappear from all records and go somewhere very dark and very cold and very far away, and work. Ask me in about 48 hours, I said. We reached the docking bay. The transport was already warming its engines. Beyond the station's hull, in the deep black between the stars, something enormous was beginning to move. It had been waiting a very long time. The stars did not look different from inside the ship. They never did. That was the strange thing about deep space. It looked the same whether you were safe or whether you were sitting at the center of the most dangerous moment in human history. The light came from the same distances, crossed the same silence, and arrived at your eyes without any sense of urgency. I recorded my first log entry 4 hours after leaving the Accord station, when the QuantumCast signal confirmed the sanction decree had been formally filed and distributed to all 312 member civilizations. Personal log, Commander Yara Solis, recording for archive, timestamp attached. I want to set the record straight on a few things before whatever happens next actually happens. The ship was called the Margin of Error. I had named her myself 12 years ago when I was first assigned as delegate. People had asked me why that name. I had always told them it was because every mission had one. The real reason was different. The real reason was that the margin of error was the gap between what people expected and what was actually true. I had always thought that gap was where humanity lived. Colin was in the forward cabin, running communication checks. I was in the small personal space at the rear, sitting on a cot with a recording device in my hand, and the stars sliding slowly past the porthole beside me. I thought about where to begin. I decided to begin with the thing nobody on that council had thought to ask. Here is what the Accord never understood about us, I said. They looked at our lifespan and called it a weakness. 80, 90, 100 years and then gone. Gone so fast in galactic terms that we barely register as a footnote in the life of a star. The Volkai who read our assessment today has been alive longer than our entire recorded history. From his perspective, we flicker. We appear, we make noise, we vanish. I paused. What he never asked was what it feels like to flicker. The ship hummed around me. The drive was running at a quiet frequency that I had always found comforting, not loud enough to be distracting, just present enough to remind you that something was working. When you know you have a limited amount of time, you do not slow down, you speed up. Every human who has ever looked at a deadline, a real one, a hard one, the kind that does not move, knows this. You do not waste the time you have. You use it. You use it badly sometimes, you use it frantically sometimes, you use it in ways you later regret. But you use it. You burn through it like fuel, and the burning is the point. I looked at the porthole. A small cluster of stars was visible, distant and cold. The Accord civilizations optimized for duration, for survival across geological time scales. Their technology evolved slowly because they had the luxury of slowly. Their political systems calcified because stability felt more important than change when you had 10,000 years to work with. They became, in a word, careful. Beautifully, impressively, terminally careful. I stood up and walked the 3 steps to the porthole. Up close, the glass was cold to the touch. Humans optimized for crisis. We did not have 10,000 years. We had Tuesday. We had this generation, this century, this burning window of time before everything we built might be gone. So we moved fast. We made mistakes. We made the same mistakes twice. We made them a third time while arguing with each other about whether it was a mistake at all. And somewhere in the middle of all that mess and noise and short-lived urgency, we occasionally made something extraordinary. That was the part that the Accord's behavioral analysts had flagged as instability. They were not wrong. They had simply not understood what the instability produced. I returned to the cot and sat down. 212 years ago, I said, a human woman named Laura Hendricks wrote a paper that no government wanted to publish and no academic journal would touch. It was 47 pages long, and it proposed a theoretical mechanism for inducing controlled stellar ignition cascades. The math was sound. The energy requirements were not achievable with any technology that existed at the time. Every reviewer who read it said the same thing: interesting concept, completely impractical, file it under theory and move on. I smiled at the memory of reading that paper for the first time. Laura Hendricks filed it herself, in a drawer, and then she went back to work. She spent the next 30 years building toward those energy requirements piece by piece, not because any institution was funding her, not because she expected to finish in her lifetime, but because she had looked at the math and decided the math was worth finishing. She died at age 81 with the project 60% complete. The porthole showed nothing but dark and stars. Her daughter Nina Hendricks continued the work. Nina had grown up watching her mother choose equations over evenings, watching her choose the long project over the comfortable one, watching her choose to believe that what she was building mattered even though she would never live to see it used. Nina made the same choice. Different field, same commitment. She focused on the energy delivery architecture, the part that would actually allow a cascade trigger to reach a stellar body from operational distance. I led a beat of silence into the recording. Nina's son, a man named George Hendricks who went by just George and worked in astrophysical engineering, completed the theoretical framework. He was 44 when he finished. He presented it to Earth Command in a meeting that lasted 2 hours, at the end of which a general named Sandra Ackafer looked at the document for a very long time and then said, and I am quoting because I read the transcript, "Does anyone outside this room know you have this?" I let out a slow breath. The answer was no, and that was the moment when something shifted, because Sandra Ackafer was not afraid of the technology. She was afraid of what would happen to humanity if the wrong people found out about it before humanity was ready. She was afraid of the vote that had not happened yet, a vote that everyone with any political sense could see coming for decades, the vote where the rest of the galaxy decided what to do with us. A soft chime sounded in the cabin. Colin's voice came through the speaker. "We are 40 minutes from the Vale Corridor, Commander. The fleet is holding position and confirms green status across all vessels." "Understood," I said. "I will be there in a few minutes." I looked back at the recording device. 914 ships, I said quietly. Built over the course of 60 years, in the dark spaces between star systems where no Accord survey drone had ever been sent. Crewed by volunteers who signed a document that removed their names from all public records, not erased, just filed somewhere very deep and very quiet. They became, officially, statistical anomalies, people the population models accounted for but could not locate. No one looked too hard, because no one in the Accord thought there was anything worth looking for. I stood up. The Accord measured our declared fleet. 1,400 registered vessels, mostly transport and survey class, with a modest number of defensive warships. Enough to protect our colonies against minor threats, not nearly enough to concern a Tier 1 civilization. That number was accurate. We had not lied. We had simply not mentioned the other part. I walked toward the door. The other part was never about a fight. I want to be very clear about that. It was never meant to be a weapon in the conventional sense. It was meant to be what all the most important tools are, a reason to reconsider. The kind of argument that does not need to be loud, because the evidence speaks in a language that every civilization, no matter how old or powerful or certain of its own judgment, has always understood. I stopped at the door. It is the language of consequences. I opened the door and walked forward to join Colin on the bridge. Through the forward screen, I could see the Vale Corridor ahead, a stretch of space that looked completely empty, completely unremarkable, and was neither. The communication board showed a single incoming signal, Earth Command, 4 words this time. Green light all stations. I read it twice. Then I set it down and looked at the stars ahead of us and thought about 3 generations of people named Hendricks who had spent their lives on something they believed mattered. I thought they would have been glad to know they were right. "Colin," I said. "Yes, Commander." "Open a channel to the fleet." He opened it. I took a breath, not for drama. Just because some moments deserve a breath before you speak into them. This is Commander Yara Solis to all unspoken fleet personnel. The sanctioned decree has been passed. Our observer status has been revoked. As of this moment, we are no longer asking for a seat at the table. I paused. We are the table. All stations prepare to move. Let them see us. The Veil Corridor began to answer. Admiral Thesivane had commanded the Accord Combined Fleet for 30 years, and he had never once felt uncertain about the outcome of an engagement before it began. He felt it now. His flagship, the Drevani carrier Immovable Will, sat at the head of a formation of 340 warships. Behind them, the colony world of Kale's Landing hung in orbit like a blue and green invitation. Human settled for 80 years. Population of 2.3 million. According to the sanctioned decree, it was now under Accord administrative authority. According to the tactical brief Thesivane had read 3 times on the way here, it would be secured without significant resistance within 4 hours of arrival. He had stopped believing that about 20 minutes ago. Because the colony had not gone dark, which was what scared populations did. It had not launched distress signals, which was what threatened populations did. It had not scrambled what few defensive ships it had, which was what proud but outmatched populations did. The people of Kale's Landing had walked outside. His long-range sensors showed it clearly, civilians moving into open spaces, gathering in what appeared to be public areas, standing in clusters on rooftops looking up. Not running, not hiding, just watching the sky, watching his fleet. Thesivane had fought 7 engagements in his career. He had faced species that screamed into the comms, species that charged with no tactical plan, species that begged, species that retreated in perfect silence. He had never faced a species that simply came outside to watch. He found, to his deep discomfort, that he did not know what category to put that in. His tactical officer, a young Drevani named Heron, spoke without turning from his station. Admiral, I am reading something in the outer belt of this system. Significant mass signature, just emerged from low-energy profile. Thesivane moved to the sensor console. What he saw there made his secondary heart skip a beat, which was something his secondary heart had not done in 15 years. 914 ships, not 1,400 transport-class vessels in a loose defensive line, not the registered human fleet, the one every Accord strategist had analyzed and dismissed. Something else entirely. Something that had been sitting in the dark between stars for decades and had never been on any chart he had ever seen. The formation was not aggressive. That was the first thing he registered with the part of his brain that had spent 30 years reading tactical situations. It was not advancing. It was not in attack formation. It was simply present, arranged in a wide arc that had appeared as if the stars themselves had decided to rearrange, and it filled his sensor readout from edge to edge. Get me identification on those vessels, he said. Running now, Heron said. Nothing in the registry, none of them. They are not registered anywhere in any Accord database. Of course they were not. Before Thesivane could issue his next order, a second alert sounded. Then a third. Then his communications array lit up with reports from Accord monitoring stations across 6 star systems, all carrying the same message in various forms of controlled alarm. Unidentified human vessels had appeared in multiple locations simultaneously. Not one fleet in one place. Many fleets, many places, all arriving at the same moment, all sitting still, all waiting. Thesivane stared at his display for a long time. A single small vessel was rising from the surface of Kale's Landing, unarmed, civilian class, moving at a conversational speed toward his flagship. It hailed him on a standard frequency. He accepted the signal. The face on the screen was a human woman. She appeared to be in her 40s, with light brown hair and the specific expression of someone who is being very careful to seem calm. Her name appeared at the bottom of the feed as Pilot Clara Dunn, Kale's Landing Colonial Authority. "Admiral Thesivane," she said, "my name is Clara. I have been authorized by Earth Command to extend you a single communication before any further action is taken by either party. I am going to ask you, respectfully, to hold your current position and consider what I am about to tell you." Thesivane said nothing. He waited. "The fleet you are now reading on your sensors is not all that we have prepared. I want you to know that, not as a threat but as information. What you are seeing is what we chose to show you. The choice was deliberate." She glanced off screen for a fraction of a second, then back. "I'm also going to ask you to watch the outer system for a moment. Sector 9, bearing 274. There is a dwarf star catalogued as KL7 in your charts. Uninhabited, scientifically unremarkable. It has been sitting in that orbit for approximately 3 billion years without any particular distinction." Thesivane's eyes moved to the sector display. He frowned. "It is about to be briefly remarkable," Clara said. "Only briefly, only enough." KL7 changed. It did not explode. It did not collapse. It did something more precise and more controlled, and Thesivane realized with a cold settling in his chest, more deliberate than either of those things. For exactly 11 seconds it brightened, a controlled pulse of energy that his instruments measured as a cascade reaction, initiated from an external source, held at a precise level, and then released. The star returned to its normal output as if nothing had happened. Except that it had happened, and Thesivane had seen it, and his instruments had recorded the origin point of the trigger, a remote relay somewhere in the outer dark, impossible to locate, impossible to interdict. Harren turned from his console. He was very young and he was trying very hard to look professional, and he was not quite managing it. "Admiral," he said, "the cascade that just occurred in KL7, the physics package is consistent with a mechanism that, if not precisely controlled, would have." "I understand what it would have done," Thesivane said. He stared at the star, still burning, steady now, patient. Clara's voice came through the speaker again, very quiet. "We did not come to this moment wanting to demonstrate that. We came here wanting none of this to be necessary. What you do in the next few minutes is going to decide what the next century looks like, Admiral, not just for your fleet, for the Accord." Thesivane looked at his tactical board. He looked at the 914 vessels sitting in silent arc formation around Kale's Landing. He looked at the reports from 6 other star systems, each showing the same pattern. He looked at the star KL7, burning its steady ancient light. He thought about the council session he had watched on broadcast. He thought about the human delegate walking in alone. He thought about the 90 seconds. He reached forward and manually switched his formation to holding status. "This is Admiral Thesivane to all fleet vessels," he said very steadily. "All units hold current position. No offensive action. Await further instruction." He looked at Clara's face on the screen. "I need to contact the High Arbiter," he said. Clara nodded. "I thought you might." She paused, and something crossed her face that Thesivane's translator could not quite categorize. It was not triumph. It was closer to grief. "I'm going to tell you something off the record, Admiral," one officer to another. "Nobody in Earth Command wanted this day to come this way. We wanted to be part of the Accord. We applied twice formally with full documentation and were told that we did not meet the threshold. We sat in observer status for 90 years and watched decisions get made about territories we had settled, about resources we had developed, about futures we had built. We were patient. We were very patient." She looked directly into the camera. "Patience has a length. Ours ran out yesterday morning in a chamber in front of 900 billion witnesses. I hope the High Arbiter understands that what happens next depends entirely on whether the Accord can learn something that patience cannot teach, which is that respect, unlike fear, has to be chosen. It cannot be forced and it cannot be demonstrated. It has to be given." She cut the signal. Thesivane sat in his command chair for a long moment. Around him, his crew was very quiet. He opened a channel to the Accord relay network and requested an emergency connection to the Grand Conclave. He was connected in 4 minutes. That was a record. The chamber felt different. I noticed it the moment I walked in. The same hall, the same concentric rings, the same dome open to the same stars. But the quality of the silence was completely changed. The first time I had walked into this room, the silence had been the silence of a decision already made, the comfortable quiet of people who know how things are going to go and are waiting for the formality to conclude. This silence was different. This was the silence of people who have just been asked a question. They are not sure they know how to answer. I walked to the center floor. I did not sit at the observer position this time. I stood in the middle of the room. There was no protocol for that. I had checked. There was no rule that said a delegate had to sit, and standing at the center of the floor was technically the position reserved for entities addressing the full council on matters of galactic significance. No one had told me I could stand there. No one had told me I could not. So I walked to the middle of the room and stood there, and 312 civilizations looked down at me from their seats, and I looked up at them. Vethan was already speaking when I arrived. He had been speaking when I entered. He was talking about protocols, about emergency session procedures, about the circumstances under which a decree could be reconsidered within the first standard cycle of its passage. He was being careful and precise and thorough, and I waited for him to finish. When he stopped, he looked at me with those ancient crystalline eyes and said, "The human delegate has been granted the floor. The council is listening." The council listening. Not 90 seconds, not a courtesy gesture, listening. I thought about Colin waiting outside. I thought about Clara on Kale's landing. I thought about 914 crew members who had spent years in the dark, holding still, holding quiet, trusting that the math would work and the moment would come. I thought about Laura Hendricks in her small office, writing 47 pages that no one wanted to read. I thought about everyone who had ever been told they were not enough, and had decided, quietly, to keep going anyway. "Thank you," I said. "I will try to be brief, because I think we all have things to get back to." A low sound from the upper rings, not laughter, something more careful than that. "I want to tell you what a human being is, not what your assessments say, not what your behavioral models predict, what we actually are. And I want you to hear it not as a threat and not as a boast, but as an explanation, because I think you deserve to understand what you have been sharing this galaxy with for the last 400 years. I looked around the room. All those different faces, all those different kinds of eyes, all that staggering variety of life that the universe had somehow managed to produce. I felt something toward all of them that was complicated and genuine and hard to name. We are not the strongest species in the Accord. I want to be clear about that. We are not the oldest, not the most technologically advanced, not the longest lived, not the most physically capable. Your assessment was right about all of those things. We are fragile and short-lived and inconsistent and very, very loud. I paused. We are also the only species in this room that evolved in a world that was actively trying to end us. The chamber was very still. Not metaphorically, not in terms of competition with other civilizations. Literally, our planet ran at a temperature range that required us to cover our bodies or die. A significant portion of the organisms we shared it with were capable of ending our lives without effort. The star we orbit produces radiation that, without the precise thickness of atmosphere we happen to develop, would have made complex life impossible. Our food supply was seasonal and inconsistent. Our fresh water was scarce. Our bodies were prone to failures that could not be predicted or controlled. And on top of all of that, on top of the storms and the predators and the disease and the environmental hostility, we were also our own greatest threat. I took a slow breath. We competed with each other, we had conflicts. We had centuries of suffering caused by nothing except our own choices. And yet somehow, in the middle of all of that, we kept building. We kept asking questions. We kept looking at the sky and thinking, what is up there and how do we reach it? Not because we were optimistic by nature. A species that has been through what we have been through is not optimistic by nature, but because we are stubborn. A delegate in the upper rings made a sound. The translation matrix rendered it as a question without words, a kind of audible uncertainty. Stubborn is the right word, I said. Not brave. Brave implies a calculation of risk. We often did not have the luxury of calculating risk. We just kept moving because stopping felt worse. We kept trying because the alternative was giving up, and somewhere in our biology, in something that predates language and civilization and every system we have ever built, something said, not yet, not done, keep going. I let that sit in the air for a moment. The technology you saw demonstrated today, the Cascade Network, was not built to intimidate the Accord. It was built by 3 generations of people who looked at a problem that could not be solved in one lifetime and decided to solve it anyway. A grandmother who wrote the theory, a mother who designed the architecture, a son who completed the framework. None of them knew for certain that it would ever be used or needed. They built it because the problem was real and the solution was possible, and they were human, which means they could not leave a solvable problem alone. I turned slowly, looking at different sections of the chamber. You voted to sanction us because your models told you we were weak. I am not here to tell you the models were wrong. The data they used was accurate. The conclusion was wrong because the conclusion was built on a misunderstanding of what weakness means when it is the condition you were forged in. I took a step forward. A species that has never faced extinction does not know what extinction pressure produces. It produces urgency. It produces creativity born from desperation. It produces the specific kind of innovation that only happens when the comfortable answer is not available, and the uncomfortable one is the only path forward. It produces people who will spend 60 years building ships in the dark on the chance that those ships will one day be needed, because they have looked at history and concluded that the chance is worth taking. Vethon's light pattern shifted. He said, "The human delegate is describing a threat." "No," I said immediately. "I am describing a fact. A threat is a choice. What I am describing is what we are. We did not choose to be forged in crisis. We did not choose the conditions of our evolution. We did not choose to be the species that looks at an impossible timeline and starts building anyway. We are simply that species. We have always been that species. And for 90 years, sitting in the observer seat, watching every decision made about the galaxy we are part of, we have been asking very politely to be recognized as that species." The room was quiet. We are not asking for empire. We have never asked for empire. We are asking for the right to exist on our own terms, in the systems we have settled, without requiring permission from a body that spent the last century documenting our weaknesses instead of trying to understand our strengths. We are asking for what every civilization in this room has, the assumption that we are here, we are capable, and we deserve to be taken seriously. I stopped. I looked at Vethon. "The fleet will hold its current position as long as this session continues. The Cascade Network is armed and will remain so, not because I am making a threat, because I am being honest with you. We are not going to disarm and hope for goodwill. We tried hope for 90 years. We are now offering clarity. Humanity will not be sanctioned. Humanity will not have its colonial territories seized. And if the Accord would like to have us as full members, genuine members, not observers positioned slightly lower than everyone else, we are willing to discuss that. Right now. Today." I paused for the last time. "But we will not sit at the small chair again. We are done with the small chair." The chamber was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Vethon was still for a long moment. His light patterns moved through several configurations that the translation matrix flagged as complex and did not fully render. Then he said, The council will deliberate. The deliberation lasted 11 minutes. I know because I counted. When Vethon spoke again, his voice was the same precise, measured tone it had always been, but something in its quality had shifted. A small thing. The translation matrix did not flag it. I noticed it anyway. The Interstellar Accord Council, having reviewed the circumstances of the sanction decree, and having considered new information material to the original assessment, moves to suspend the decree pending further review. The Council further proposes to open formal discussion on the matter of full Accord membership for the species Homo sapiens, to be conducted according to standard treaty procedures. He paused. The High Arbiter requests one clarification from the human delegate. Yes, I said. If full membership is granted, will the human government consider deactivating the Cascade network? I thought about it. I gave it a genuine few seconds of consideration, not because I was uncertain, but because the question deserved a real answer and not a fast one. No, I said, but we will allow independent Accord verification that it is never armed against any Accord member, and we will agree to the same mutual non-aggression protocols as every other full member. The network will exist. It will not be aimed. Think of it the way you think of your own emergency capabilities, present, maintained, and hopefully never relevant. A pause. We are humans, we do not disarm, but we choose very carefully and very deliberately when to act. That choice is ours. We are asking you to trust it. The second vote was called immediately. The green lights changed. Not all of them. Some held red, and I respected that. It was honest and it was theirs to give. But enough changed. More than enough. The tally appeared on the wall display, and Colin, watching through the broadcast feed from the corridor outside, sent me a single message on my personal comm that read, "We did it." I looked at the tally for a long moment. Then I looked up at the stars through the dome. I did not feel triumphant. I had thought I might when this moment came. I had imagined it sometimes over the years, the vote going the other way, the acknowledgement finally arriving, the thing we had worked toward finally landing. What I actually felt was tired, and relieved, and a little sad, and deeply, completely grateful for every person who had made this moment possible without living to see it. I walked out of the chamber for the second time in 2 days. Colin was waiting in the corridor, the way he always was. He looked at me. He did not say anything for a moment. "Are you happy?" he finally asked. I thought about it for a long time, long enough that he shifted his weight and looked slightly uncomfortable. "Ask me in 100 years," I said, "if we did not break something important on the way." He nodded slowly. "That is not a no." "No," I agreed, "it is not a no." We walked to the docking bay together. The transport was waiting. Somewhere very far away, 914 ships were beginning to power down their active systems, no longer needed. The stars outside the station's windows were the same stars they had always been, but something between them had changed, some arrangement of understanding, some quiet shift in what it meant to share a galaxy. I thought it was probably a good change. I thought it was probably worth every year of waiting. But I also thought that the work was not over. The work with humans was never over. That was the point. That was the whole point. This is a message for my granddaughter. Her name is Nora, and she is 7 years old right now, and she has never known a galaxy in which humans did not have full Accord membership. She has grown up on a colony world that has 2 moons and a violet sky at dusk, and she has never had reason to feel that the universe considered her species anything less than legitimate. I want her to know things that the history files do not quite capture, because history files are very good at recording what happened, and not always very good at recording what it felt like. I am 69 years old as I record this. My hair went fully gray about 3 years ago, and I decided I liked it. I live in a small house on the edge of a settlement on the colony world of New Arage, which is a frontier world in the technical sense. The infrastructure is still rough in places. The weather does not always cooperate, and the nearest large city is a 6-hour transport ride east. I requested this posting. Several people thought I was being strange about it. I was not being strange. I just needed to be somewhere that still smelled like beginning. The Accord membership vote was 42 years ago. In 42 years, a great deal has happened, and a great deal has remained exactly the same, and the ratio of those two things is approximately what I expected. Here is what has happened. Humanity's full membership was ratified through the standard treaty process, which took about 14 months from the emergency session to final implementation. During those 14 months, there were 3 attempted challenges, 2 procedural delays, and 1 remarkable incident in which a Vauxhall Jr. delegate attempted to submit a motion arguing that the demonstration of the Cascade Network constituted an act of aggression under Accord law, which was dismissed when it was pointed out that showing something is not the same as using it, and that every civilization in the Accord maintained deterrent capabilities of various kinds, and had never been asked to dismantle them as a condition of membership. That case went nowhere, but it was instructive. It told me and everyone paying attention that the change in our status was not the same as a change in the underlying dynamic. We had not become beloved overnight. We had become, at best, respected, at worst, feared, and respect earned through a demonstration of consequence rather than through years of gradual relationship building was always going to be fragile in certain quarters. I want Nora to understand that distinction. Respect and love are not the same. Respect can be earned in a moment. Love takes much longer and comes from different places entirely. Some Accord civilizations have never fully warmed to us. Several species that were members at the time of the emergency session formally requested reduced contact protocols with human colonial territories, which is a polite way of saying they would prefer as little to do with us as possible. 3 smaller civilizations actually withdrew from the Accord entirely within the first decade after our membership was ratified. I do not think that was exclusively because of us. The Accord had other tensions building for years, but I do not think it was unrelated either. On the other side of that ledger, 4 civilizations that had no prior relationship with humanity reached out within the first year to request formal dialogue and cultural exchange. One of them was the Sulhari, who had arrived at the original council session with armed escorts and voted for the sanctioned decree. Their ambassador, a remarkable individual named Ven Sulhari, they used their species name as a personal name, which I find beautiful, told me during our first meeting that what they had found most striking about the emergency session was not the fleet or the Cascade demonstration. It was my face while the vote was being read. I asked what they meant. Ven said, "You were not angry, you were sad. We had expected anger. We had modeled for anger. We had no model for a species that faces an existential threat and responds with grief instead of rage." I told them that the two were not mutually exclusive for humans. Often they were the same thing, just wearing different expressions. Ven thought about that for a very long time. We ended up talking for 6 hours. They became one of the most important relationships I have had in my career, and I think of them often. This is what I want Nora to know. The most important things that happened after the vote were not the political things, as significant as those were. The most important things were the conversations. The slow and often difficult process of 2 species trying to understand each other without the benefit of a shared history or a shared biology or a shared way of organizing experience. The moments when the translator got something almost right but not quite, and you had to find your way to meaning through gesture and patience and the willingness to be uncertain together. The Cascade Network still exists. It is maintained by an Earth Command Division that goes by an unremarkable administrative name and operates out of facilities that are not secret, but are not widely publicized either. There has been one independent Accord verification, conducted about 20 years after our membership was ratified, which confirmed that the network had not been armed since the day of the emergency session and showed no evidence of preparation for activation. The verification team returned their report without public comment, which I thought was gracious of them. I was asked once, in an interview, whether I ever regretted the way things unfolded, whether I wished we had found a different path to membership, a quieter one, a less dramatic one, a path that had not required standing in the middle of a council chamber and saying things that were permanently on record and would never stop being quoted at us by people trying to make a point. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I said no, I did not regret it. I regretted that it was necessary. Those are very different things. What I regretted, and continue to regret, in the way that is not quite regret but more like a permanent background ache, was the years before, the 90 years of observer status, the 2 formal membership applications that went nowhere, the policy discussions where human perspectives were invited as a formality and then set aside, the incremental and polite accumulation of being told, in various ways, that we were not quite what was needed for the table. We were patient. I still believe patience was right. I still believe that arriving at the emergency session as a civilization that had spent 90 years trying to work within the system, however imperfect, was important. It meant that when we finally said enough, the record showed clearly that we had tried the other way first. We had not been reckless. We had not been aggressive. We had been extraordinarily patient, and when the patience ran out, we were honest about that, and we showed exactly what we had in reserve and asked clearly for what we needed. That sequence matters. I hope Nora understands that sequence matters. Here is what has remained the same. Humans are still short-lived by galactic standards. I am 69, and that is considered elderly in a species whose maximum natural lifespan is around 110. The Volkai individual who read our assessment in that chamber is still alive. He was alive before humans had developed writing. He will likely still be alive when the colony Nora was born on has a population of hundreds of millions and a recorded history of its own. We still make decisions fast. We still move faster than most Accord species are comfortable with. Human colonial expansion has continued, not at the rate that triggered the original crisis, but steadily, consistently, and in ways that other civilizations sometimes find surprising. We tend to look at a difficult environment and think about how to adapt it rather than whether to settle elsewhere. We tend to find problems interesting rather than discouraging. We tend to keep going. These things have not changed because they are not policies. They are not behaviors that can be adjusted through legislation or treaty. They are what we are, the residue of how we were made, by a world that required a particular kind of creature to emerge from it, and that creature was us. I want Nora to know that being that creature is not always easy. There are days when the speed that is our nature works against us, when the urgency that kept us alive for 10,000 years becomes the impatience that breaks something that needed more time, when the creativity born from desperation becomes the recklessness that invents a problem while solving another. We have not stopped making those mistakes. We will not stop making those mistakes. They are the cost of the same engine that gets us to the stars. The question I have spent 40 years thinking about since that council session, is whether we can keep the engine running without losing the things that make the engine worth running for. Because here is the truth that the Accord could not have measured, and that I am not sure we fully understood ourselves, until we were forced to look at it from the outside. We are not powerful because we are fast or inventive or stubborn, though we are all of those things. We are not powerful because we built ships in the dark or solved equations across generations, or stood our ground in a chamber when the vote was already cast. We are powerful because we care. That is the thing the assessment missed, not the capabilities, not the technology, not even the determination, the caring. We care about each other with a ferocity that seems unreasonable given our lifespan. We love people who will be gone within a century, and we love them as if they are permanent, as if the love itself can make them so. We grieve losses that, in galactic terms, are infinitesimally small: a single life, a single relationship, a single moment that will not come back. We treat those small things as if they are the whole universe, because to us, in the moment, they are. And that caring is what makes everything else worth doing. Laura Hendricks did not spend 30 years on a theoretical framework because she wanted to give humanity a weapon. She did it because she wanted to give humanity a future, and she cared enough about that future to spend her life on it even though she would not live to see it. Nina did not continue the work out of duty. She continued it because her mother had loved something deeply and had trusted that love enough to pass it on, and Nina had received that love and decided it was worth carrying. George did not finish the framework because he was ambitious. He finished it because he looked at what his grandmother and mother had built and felt something that I do not have a better word for than devotion. He was devoted to the project. He was devoted to the people who had believed in it before him. He was devoted to the idea that what they had believed in was true and worth proving. That chain of devotion across 3 generations, that willingness to care about something larger than a single lifetime, is not a tactical asset. You cannot put it in a threat assessment. You cannot quantify it. You cannot point at it on a display panel and say, "Here is the thing to be cautious about." But it is the most dangerous and the most beautiful thing about us. Nara, you are going to grow up in a galaxy that takes humans seriously. You are going to be taken seriously before you have done anything to earn it, simply because you are human, simply because the people who came before you did the earning for you. That is a gift. It is an extraordinary gift. Please do not waste it on comfort. The worst thing that could happen to us, the outcome I have spent 40 years quietly worrying about, is not another sanctioned decree or another vote or another civilization that decides it would rather not deal with us. The worst thing that could happen to us is safety, not the safety of being protected, which is good and necessary and worth fighting for. The safety of being so established, so accepted, so comfortable in our position in the accord that we stop moving. Because if we stop moving, we stop being what we are. The universe is enormous. We have touched a very small part of it. There are systems no ship has visited, phenomena no instrument has measured, forms of life that have never heard the sound of a human voice or seen the particular light that comes through the atmosphere of a world where people are alive and building and asking questions. There is so much still to know, and you will be alive at a time when the knowing is possible in ways it has never been before. Do not let that possibility sit. Do not let it become theoretical. Do not look at the size of what remains and decide it is someone else's project. It is yours. It was always yours. It is ours. We are not the strongest. We are not the oldest. We are not the most beautiful or the most rational or the most stable species in a galaxy full of extraordinary life. We are the most stubborn and the most urgent and the most in love with the impossible, and those things together make us exactly what we need to be. The Council declared us weak. They were right about everything they could measure. They were not right about everything. Stay hungry, Nora. Stay a little scared, not enough to stop you, just enough to keep you honest about what matters. Look at the sky and mean it when you look. Ask the questions that feel too large to answer and then spend your life on the answers anyway. Love people who will not last as long as you want them to. Build things you will not finish. Pass them on. Stay human. The universe is watching. It has not yet decided what we are capable of. I think we should keep surprising it.